Let go of her right away. How dare you treat her this way? I'll make you pay for your actions.
The champagne was cold in her hand, and the room was too loud, and Amara Cole had learned, in the 18 months since the accident, to measure every space by how fast she could leave it. This one would take 4 minutes, maybe 5, if the crowd near the elevator didn't thin. She ran the numbers quietly, the way she always did now, exits, obstacles, the radius of her wheelchair against the width of the gaps between bodies. Her chair was custom. Titanium frame, matte black, narrow enough to navigate most rooms if she was careful. She was always careful. Careful had become the architecture of her entire life since the night a drunk driver on the 405 had rearranged everything she thought she knew about herself. She hadn't wanted to come tonight. The gala was in the penthouse of the Hurungtun Tower, 42 floors above downtown Los Angeles, all glass walls and catered perfection, and people whose names appeared regularly in Forbes. Her business partner, Doen, had begged her. "You designed half the pieces in this collection, Amara. You deserve to be there when they launch." And because Amara had never been good at letting other people carry credit that belonged to her, she had said yes. That was the first mistake. The second was wearing the red dress. She'd chosen it deliberately, silk, structured at the shoulders, the color of something unapologetic. She had wanted to feel like herself. The woman she'd been before, the jewelry designer who'd built a 6-figure brand from a studio apartment and a second-hand kiln, who'd walked into rooms and made people look. She thought the dress would help her remember that woman. Instead, it had made her visible in the wrong way. She felt the shift in the room before she heard the voice. It was the particular quality of silence that spreads when someone decides to perform cruelty publicly. A held breath, a subtle repositioning of bodies, the way people instinctively orient themselves towards spectacle. "Is this the accessible section?" The voice was smooth, male, practiced in the specific cadence of men who'd never been told no by anyone who mattered. "I didn't realize the gala had one. How forward-thinking." Amara turned. He was tall, pale in the way of men who spent their money on boats but never their time on them, wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than her first kiln. She didn't know his name yet. She would learn it shortly, in the way you learn the names of things that have hurt you, reluctantly, permanently. His name was Preston Hale. He was the lead investor behind the luxury brand hosting tonight's collection. He was, she would later understand, the kind of man who believed that wealth was permission. He was looking at her chair the way people sometimes did, not at her, but at the chair, as though she were an accessory to it rather than the other way around. "Lovely craftsmanship," he said, and he was not talking about her jewelry. The laughter that followed was scattered, uncertain, the kind that happens when people are deciding whether something is funny or terrible, and they're waiting for someone else to decide first. Amara had been in rooms full of people waiting for someone else to decide. She had never been that person. She set her champagne glass on the tray of a passing server with the steady, precise movement of a woman who had not forgotten who she was. "The craftsmanship is titanium alloy with a custom carbon fiber grip," she said, her voice carrying cleanly across the cluster of people who'd gone quiet. "It costs more than your suit, but I wouldn't expect you to recognize quality when you see it." Someone exhaled. Someone else almost smiled. Preston Hale's expression shifted into something that wasn't quite embarrassment and wasn't quite rage. It was the particular look of a man who'd meant to perform and found himself outperformed. He recovered the way men like him always did, by escalating. "Spirited," he said. "I admire that. It must be difficult, though, attending these kinds of events." He gestured vaguely at everything, at her, at the distance between who she was and where she was sitting. "It takes a certain kind of bravery, I suppose, to still try." Still try. The words landed precisely where he'd aimed them. Because that was the thing about skilled cruelty. It didn't shout. It murmured. It dressed itself in the language of compliment and concern, and it found the exact seam of a person's armor and pressed. The room had gone very quiet now. Amara felt it, the heat behind her eyes, the tightening in her throat that she refused, absolutely refused, to give him. She had not cried in public since the hospital. She was not going to start in a penthouse in front of people who were deciding whether she deserved their sympathy. She opened her mouth, and then the elevator doors opened. She didn't hear it so much as feel it, the way the energy in the room reorganized itself, the way conversations stopped mid-sentence, the way Preston Hale's easy, practiced confidence drained from his face like water from a cracked glass. Amara turned. The man who stepped out of the elevator was not loud. He didn't need to be. He moved through the parted crowd the way a cold front moves through summer air, not forcing anything, simply making warmth impossible. He was wearing black, all black. His hands were in his pockets. His face was calm in the way of men who have never needed to perform calm because they have simply never been afraid. He wasn't looking at Preston Hale. He was looking at her. And even after 14 months of silence, even after the divorce papers she'd signed in a hospital bed with a hand that had only just relearned how to hold a pen, Amara Cole recognized the look on Kim Yeon's face. She had seen it once before. The last time, a man had disappeared. She had told herself she was over him. Not in the way people say it when they mean I'm working on it or I'm almost there. She had told herself with the full conviction of a woman who had rebuilt herself from the floor up, who had learned to navigate the world from a different height, who had signed her name to the end of something that had once been the most consuming experience of her life. Kim Yeon. She had loved him the way you love something dangerous, completely, and with the full knowledge that it would cost you. They had met 6 years ago in a gallery in Seoul. She had been there for a gemstone exhibition, running her fingers along display cases, mentally cataloging cuts and colors for designs that existed only in her sketchbook at the time. He had been there for reasons he never fully explained, which she later understood was simply the nature of him. Yeon existed in rooms without requiring justification for his presence. He simply arrived, and the room adjusted. He had looked at a piece of raw black tourmaline in the third case and said, quietly more to himself than to her, "It's more beautiful before it's cut. Most things are." She had disagreed. She had told him so. He had looked at her then, really looked, the way he did, like he was reading something written in a language most people couldn't see, and he had smiled. Not widely, just enough. That was how it started. 3 years of marriage, 2 continents, a life that was never simple and never boring and always weighted with the knowledge of what he was and what that meant and who came looking for people connected to Kim Yeon when they wanted to reach Kim Yeon. She had not left because she stopped loving him. She had left because loving him had become a different kind of paralysis, long before the accident made that word literal. And now he was crossing a penthouse in Los Angeles, while Preston Hale stood 6 feet away from her, with the confidence visibly leaving his body like air from a punctured tire. And Amara was doing the one thing she had promised herself she would never do again. She was watching Yeon move and feeling something unknot in her chest. He stopped in front of her. Up close, he looked the same. That was the unfair thing. 14 months, and the man looked like time had simply decided not to bother him. The sharp line of his jaw, the dark eyes that processed everything and revealed nothing, the particular stillness that wasn't passivity. It was the stillness of something that had already decided and was simply waiting for the moment to arrive. There was one difference. His hands, when they came out of his pockets, showed new ink at the wrists, dark lines extending past his cuffs. She didn't ask. She wouldn't. "Amara," he said. Just her name, the way he'd always said it, not as a greeting, but as a confirmation, as though her existence required acknowledgement before anything else could happen. "Yeon," her voice was steady, she was proud of that. "You weren't invited to this." "No," he agreed. "Then why are you here?" He didn't answer immediately. He had never answered questions immediately. He considered them, the way a craftsman considers a material before cutting. His eyes moved, briefly, to Preston Hale, who was standing very still in the way of men who have suddenly understood they are in a room with something they cannot manage. Then his eyes came back to her. "I heard you were here," he said simply. The implication of that, The infrastructure required for a man to asterisk here asterisk, something like that. The network of eyes and ears that meant Kim Yi-won always knew where she was even when she'd spent 14 months pretending he didn't know, couldn't know, had agreed not to know, settled over her quietly. She should have been angry. She noted that she wasn't. "This is a private event," Preston Hale said. The words came out of him with the last remaining reserves of authority he could assemble. He was a man who was accustomed to being the most powerful presence in a room. He had spent 40 years building a life in which that was true. He could see, on some animal level, that tonight was different, but he was the kind of man who doubled down rather than retreated. It was a significant miscalculation. Yi-won turned to look at him. Just turned, didn't speak, didn't move from where he stood. He simply directed his attention at Preston Hale the way you direct light through glass, focused, concentrated, generating heat. Preston held it for approximately 4 seconds. 4 seconds was longer than most men managed. "I don't believe we've met," Preston continued, his voice dropping from authority into something more careful. "And I'm going to have to ask you to." "What did you say to her?" Yi-won's voice was quiet, conversational, the kind of quiet that is not the absence of danger but the presence of it in a very concentrated form. Preston blinked. "I beg your pardon." "When I walked in," Yi-won said, "you were speaking, she was not smiling." He tilted his head slightly. "What did you say?" The room had gone absolutely still. Amara watched it happen, watched Preston Hale's cycle through his options in real time, watched him search the faces around him for support and find none, watched him perform a rapid internal calculation, and arrive at the conclusion that bravado had a ceiling. "It was a private conversation," Preston said. "It was a public room," Yi-won replied. He finally moved then, not toward Preston, but to her side. He positioned himself with a naturalness that suggested he had simply come home to a place he'd always stood. His hand did not touch her. He simply occupied the space beside her the way a wall occupies space, present, solid, load-bearing. "My wife," he said to the room, to no one in particular, to everyone, was speaking. Amara's breath caught. "Ex-wife asterisk," she should have said. The papers were signed. The distance was real. 14 months of rebuilding herself into a woman who did not need the particular gravity of Kim Yi-won to keep herself in orbit. She said nothing. Because Preston Hale had gone the color of old ash, and across the room, near the service entrance, she had noticed 2 men in dark clothing who had not been there 60 seconds ago, and they were watching Preston Hale with the patient, unhurried attention of men who had been given instructions and were simply waiting for the word. Yi-won had not come here to make a scene. He had come here to make a point. And the point, Amara understood with the cold clarity of a woman who had once known this man completely, was only just beginning. Preston Hale made the decision to save himself. Amara watched him make it, watched the exact moment his body chose retreat over pride, the slight shift of weight backward, the micro-expression of a man swallowing something that tasted like humiliation. He adjusted his cuffs. He produced a smile that didn't reach anything above his jaw. He said something to the woman beside him, his date, a thin blonde who had been silent through everything and looked relieved to have a reason to move. And then he turned and walked toward the far end of the room with the careful, measured pace of a man pretending he was choosing to leave. The crowd exhaled. Conversations restarted in low, careful murmurs. The string quartet in the corner, who had stopped playing at some point Amara hadn't noticed, resumed something slow and European. The room remembered itself. Amara looked up at Yi-won. He was still watching Preston Hale's retreat with the dispassionate attention of a man cataloging information. Not angry. Never angry. Anger was reactive, and Yi-won did not react. He observed, he calculated, and then he acted with a precision that left no room for the chaos that emotion introduced. She had always found that quality simultaneously reassuring and terrifying. "You can stop watching him," she said. "He's gone." "He hasn't gone anywhere," Yi-won replied. He said it the way he said most things, without drama, without emphasis, as a simple statement of fact. Then he finally looked at her, and the quality of his attention shifted the way it always had when he turned it fully on her, like the difference between ambient light and a focused beam. "You look well," he said. "Don't," she said. "It's an observation." "Everything you say is an observation. That's what makes it exhausting." She turned her chair slightly, angling herself so she wasn't looking directly up at him. She'd learned to manage the geometry of conversations from a seated position, the angles that felt like looking up in supplication versus the angles that felt like choice. "You shouldn't have come, Yi-won." "Probably not. That's not a defense. It wasn't meant to be." He moved then, fluidly, to a position that brought them level, crouching beside her chair with the unself-conscious ease of a man who had done it 1,000 times during the 8 months of her recovery that she had tried very hard not to think about. The 8 months when he had been there, quietly and without permission, handling things she hadn't asked him to handle and refusing to be sent away, until she'd had the strength to mean it when she said go. Up close, she could see the tiredness around his eyes. Faint. He would never let it show in his posture or his face, but the eyes always told the truth about Yi-won if you knew how to read them. She knew how to read them. "How long have you been in Lowe's Angels?" she asked. 3 days. "Business?" "Yes." She didn't ask what kind. She had stopped asking what kind 3 years into their marriage, not because she'd stopped wanting to know, but because she'd understood that the full answer was a weight she couldn't carry without it changing her, and she had wanted, for as long as possible, to remain the woman she was before the knowledge reshaped her. "You look tired," she said. Something moved across his face. Brief, controlled, gone. "You said you wouldn't do that." "Do what?" "See things." Despite everything, despite the 14 months and the papers and the careful architecture of distance she'd built, she almost smiled. Almost. "I said I wouldn't look for things. I didn't say I'd go blind." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he stood, returning to his full height, and the brief softness that crouching had created, the slight vulnerability of a powerful man making himself smaller, dissolved back into the composed, unreadable surface he showed the world. "I'm going to need you to stay in this room," he said. The almost smile died. "Excuse me. There are people here tonight who are not what they appear to be." He said it without looking at her, his gaze moving in a slow, methodical sweep of the room that looked casual and was anything but. "The gala is a secondary event. The primary event is a transaction happening 3 floors below us, in a private suite, involving people I have been tracking for 11 months. Amara stared at him. "You came here for work," she said flatly. "I came here for you," he said, "and then I confirmed what I suspected about tonight's other activities." He paused. "Both things are true simultaneously." "How convenient for you." "Amara," he said her name the way he had at the elevator, as a full stop, a reorientation, a request that she hear the weight beneath the words rather than just the words themselves. "Preston Hale is not simply a rude man at a party." She went still. "He is the financial conduit for a trafficking network operating between Seoul, Lagos, and Lowe's Angels. The luxury brand is a front. The galas are acquisition events." His voice remained conversational. Even. The words landed like stones into still water. "The women who receive personal invitations from his office, the private ones, the ones that come with car service and after-party details, do not always return from them." The room felt different now. Same champagne. Same string quartet. Same glass walls with the city blazing 42 floors below. But the geometry of everything had rearranged itself around the information he'd just placed in the air between them, and Amara found herself doing what she always did when the world revealed itself to be more dangerous than it had appeared. She got very, very quiet, and she started thinking. "Diane," she said. Yi-won's expression confirmed it before he spoke. "Your business partner received a private invitation," he said. "Car service. After party. Sent from Hale's personal assistant 4 days ago." "Where is she?" "In the room. She arrived 20 minutes before you." He paused. She has been speaking with two of Hale's associates near the East Bar for the last 40 minutes. They are establishing comfort. This is how the process begins. Amara's hands tightened on her armrests. Diane had been her closest friend for 9 years, had sat with her in the hospital, had held her hand through the first time she'd tried to transfer from the bed to the chair and collapsed halfway and cried for 40 minutes on the floor, had built their business from nothing alongside her during recovery, had believed in the jewelry line when belief was all they had. Diane, who had mentioned the private after-party invitation last week, with excitement, Amara had dismissed as her friend's natural enthusiasm for anything that glittered. "You're certain," Amara said. "I am never certain until I am," Yi-won said, "but I am close enough that I am here." She looked across the room. She found Diane in 30 seconds' bright yellow dress, natural hair pinned up, laughing at something one of the men beside her had said. Relaxed, happy, completely unaware. "What are you going to do?" Amara asked. Yi-won's gaze moved to the service entrance, where his men still stood with their patient, unhurried stillness. "What I came to do," he said quietly. And the way he said it left absolutely no room for ambiguity about what that meant. Amara had spent 3 years married to Kim Yi-won, learning the difference between what he said and what he meant. He spoke in clean, spare sentences, no excess, no decoration, no words deployed without purpose. It had taken her months early in their marriage to understand that this wasn't coldness. It was precision. Every word he chose was load-bearing. You had to listen to the weight of what he said, not just the surface of it. "What I came to do." She understood exactly what that meant. "I need to get to Diane," Amara said. "Not yet." "Yi-won." "If you move toward her now, you alert the men beside her. They will read the approach, reassess the situation, and Hale will be informed within minutes. He will move the operation." He didn't look at her while he said it. His eyes were still working the room with that slow, systematic patience that she knew from experience was not observation for its own sake, but mapping, exits, personnel, sightlines, variables. "We need him to believe tonight is proceeding normally for another 40 minutes. 40 minutes, she repeated. "There is a team in position on the 39th floor. The transaction is scheduled for 11. It is currently 10:17. He finally looked at her. 40 minutes. She absorbed this. This was the thing about Yi-won that no one who hadn't lived beside him could fully understand. The operations were never impulsive. By the time he appeared somewhere, the preparation behind his appearance was extensive, layered, and largely invisible. He did not arrive at situations. He arrived at conclusions. The situation had already been managed by the time he walked through the door. It should have made her feel safer. It made her feel the particular helplessness of being inside a plan she hadn't agreed to. "You've been building this for 11 months, she said. "Yes. And you didn't tell me Diane was involved." A pause measured. "I confirmed her invitation 48 hours ago. I was in Seoul." Another pause. "And telling you would have required a conversation I was not certain you would take." Amara looked at him steadily. "You mean I might not have picked up?" "I mean," he said carefully, "that I was not certain you would take a call from me about anything." The honesty of that landed quietly between them. She didn't deny it. She had blocked his number for 4 months after the divorce, had unblocked it at 3 in the morning on a night when the phantom pain in her legs had been unbearable, and she'd wanted, irrationally, completely, to hear his voice, and then had not called, and had spent the next week furious at herself for the unblocking. She had left the number accessible after that. She hadn't examined why. "I need something to do," she said. "I cannot sit here for 40 minutes watching Diane laugh with men who want to hurt her and do nothing." Yi-won considered this. She could see him running the variables, adjusting the plan around her the way he always had, not dismissing her capabilities, but integrating them with the focused practicality of a man who understood that Amara Cole doing nothing was both a waste and a guarantee she would eventually do something unauthorized. "There is a woman near the north window," he said. "Green dress. She has been watching the room for the last 20 minutes. She is not a guest." Amara found her without appearing to look. technique she'd developed since the accident, the peripheral attention you cultivate when you can't turn quickly, when your movement through space requires planning, and you learn to gather information from angles rather than direct focus. The woman was mid-30s, Southeast Asian, holding a wine glass she hadn't drunk from. Her eyes moved with the same systematic quality as Yiwon's. "Yours?" Amara asked. "Minjai," he confirmed. "She has been managing the room since 9. She will keep Diane in sightline." He paused. "But she cannot create a natural reason to insert herself into that conversation without raising attention. Another man approaching would be read correctly." He looked at Amara. "A woman, a friend of the guest, that reads as coincidence." Amara understood immediately. "You want me to get to Diane?" "I want you to keep Diane away from the after-party invitation without explaining why." His voice was precise. "Do not mention Hale by name. Do not indicate anything is wrong with the event. Simply occupy her. Be the reason she stays on this floor. And if she's already committed to going, then you are more persuasive than she is stubborn." He said it with the faint certainty of a man who had watched Amara Cole talk her way into and out of more situations than most people encountered in a decade. She looked at Diane across the room. 32 years old, 9 years of friendship. The woman who had learned to make coffee exactly the way Amara needed it during the months of recovery. Strong, no sugar, served without comment or sympathy, just placed within reach like a quiet declaration that life was continuing, and here was evidence. The man beside her, late 40s, silver at his temples, the cultivated warmth of someone professionally practiced at being liked, touched Diane's arm as he laughed. Brief, light, establishing. Amara's jaw tightened. "I'll need 10 minutes with her alone," Amara said. "You have 12 before Hale's assistant circulates with the after-party details." Yiwon straightened slightly. "There is a seating area near the east terrace. If you can move her there, Minjai will maintain visual, and the sightline from the service corridor is clear." "And Preston Hale is currently in the elevator." His voice remained even. "He will return in 8 minutes. He will not approach you again tonight." The certainty in that statement required no elaboration. Amara released a slow breath. She looked up at him one more time, this man she had loved and left and rebuilt herself in the absence of, this man who had walked into a room 42 floors above a city and rearranged everything simply by arriving. "After tonight," she said, "you and I are going to have a conversation." Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise, something quieter. Something that looked on a face that rarely showed it like the careful beginning of hope. "I'll be available," he said. She didn't respond to that. She turned her chair toward the east side of the room, toward Diane in the yellow dress, laughing with men whose warmth was a mechanism and whose interest was an inventory. She moved with the steady, deliberate purpose of a woman who had learned that her chair was not a limitation, but simply a different way of occupying space, and that in the right hands, even the way you moved through a room could be a form of power. Behind her, she felt Yiwon watching. She always had. She crossed the room in 2 minutes flat. She came up beside Diane from the left, the natural approach, the angle that didn't require crossing the men's sightline, and she put her hand on her best friend's arm the way she had 1,000 times before. Diane turned. Her face opened into genuine delight. "Amara, where have you been? I've been looking everywhere." "Come look at the terrace view with me," Amara said, warm and easy, nothing in her voice that would register as anything other than a friend reclaiming her friend's attention. "It's clear tonight. You can see all the way to the coast." Diane glanced back at the men beside her. The silver-templed one smiled graciously. "Of course, we'll catch up later." It was the asterisk later in that sentence, the confidence of it, the certainty that later was already arranged, that confirmed everything Yiwon had told her. Amara smiled at him pleasantly, and she moved Diane toward the terrace with the calm, unhurried certainty of a woman who had already decided how this night was going to end. The terrace was cold and quiet, and exactly what Amara needed. Lowe's angels spread below them in every direction, a sprawling grid of light that went on until it became indistinguishable from the stars at the horizon's edge. The wind off the coast was sharp enough to cut through silk, and Amara felt it against her arms and was glad for it. Cold was clarifying. Cold kept you present. Diane leaned against the glass railing and exhaled dramatically, the way she always did when she transitioned between social performance and genuine self. Okay, I needed that. That room is a lot. She looked down at the city, then back at Amara. Your dress is incredible, by the way. You didn't tell me you were wearing red. I didn't decide until the last minute. It was the right decision. Diane studied her with the particular attention of a woman who had spent 9 years learning to read Amara Cole the way Amara read gemstones, looking for the inclusions beneath the surface, the internal structures that determined value and fragility and strength. You okay? I heard something happened earlier. Someone said there was a moment with Preston Hale. Amara kept her expression neutral. Someone's always having a moment with someone at these things. That's not an answer. I'm fine, Diane. Diane watched her for another second, then let it go, the way good friends learn to, not because they stop caring, but because they understand the difference between the moment to press and the moment to trust. She turned back to the view. The collection looks good tonight. The obsidian cuff is getting a lot of attention. 3 people asked me about the designer before I could even get a drink. Which one said it? The woman in the Schiaparelli. And 2 men, one was actually that investor, the one I was speaking to when you found me, Ethan something. He was very, Diane paused, searching for the word. Attentive, Amara offered. Yes, attentive. Diane smiled, and the smile had warmth in it that made Amara's chest tighten. He mentioned the after-party. Apparently there's a smaller gathering on the 39th floor, more curated, his word, and he said the view is even better than up here, which I didn't think was possible, but... I need you to skip it, Amara said. Diane blinked. What? The after-party. I need you to not go. The directness landed in the space between them, and Diane went very still with it. That particular stillness that Amara recognized as her best friend, shifting from social mode into the sharper, more careful register she used when something felt off. Why? Diane said. Not a question, a door she was opening carefully. Amara had run the calculus 3 times on the way across the room. She could not tell Diane the full truth, not here, not in 40-second fragments on a terrace where anyone could be listening, not without triggering exactly the kind of visible reaction that would alert the men inside that something had changed. But she could not lie to Diane, not fully. Diane would see through a full lie the way light went through water. She had to give her enough truth to trust her, without enough detail to frighten her into showing it. I know things about the people running this event, Amara said quietly. Things I'm not able to explain fully right now in this place. But I am asking you, as your friend, as someone who has never once asked you to trust me without a reason, to not go to that after-party. Diane looked at her. The city hummed 42 floors below them. Somewhere inside, a string quartet finished a movement, and the guests applauded politely. How serious, Diane said slowly, is the thing you know? Serious enough that I came to find you the moment I found out. Silence. Then Diane turned fully to face her, and her expression had completed its transition. All the warmth and social animation had settled into the clear, grounded attention of a woman who trusted her own instincts and trusted Amara's even more. Okay, she said simply. Amara exhaled. Okay, Diane said again. I won't go. She paused. But you're going to tell me everything later. Everything, Amara confirmed. They stayed on the terrace for another 3 minutes, long enough to be natural, long enough for Amara to feel her phone vibrate once in the small bag on her armrest. She glanced down. A message from a number she didn't have saved. 12 digits, Seoul country code. Floor secured, 39. Move her toward the main elevator when ready. J. She locked the screen. Let's go back in, she said to Diane. I'm cold. You're always cold. I'm always right about being cold. Diane laughed and pushed off the railing, and they went back through the glass doors into the warmth and noise of the gala. and Amara moved them naturally toward the main elevator bank, the way you move a person when you know the architecture of a space and they don't, not pushing, not rushing, just occupying the natural current of a room until it carries you where you need to go. She did not look for Yiwon. She knew he was there. She knew he was watching the way he always watched, comprehensively, without appearing to, the way an ocean is always present without requiring your acknowledgement. She had spent 3 years inside that awareness and another 14 months pretending she didn't miss it, and she was tired, suddenly and completely, of pretending. She was almost to the elevator bank when she heard it. A sound that was not quite loud enough to be alarming, and was precisely loud enough to stop every conversation in a 50-foot radius. It came from the direction of the service corridor. Not a crash, not a shout. Something smaller and more significant than either, the sound of a door hitting a wall with the controlled momentum of someone who had opened it with purpose, and then a quality of silence that followed it that was different from ordinary quiet. Amara turned. Preston Hale was standing at the entrance to the main room. He had come from the service corridor rather than the elevator, which meant he had come up from the 39th floor, which meant something on the 39th floor had changed. His composure was gone. Not shattered, men like Preston Hale didn't shatter. They cracked along very specific lines, and the cracks showed in the eyes first, then the jaw, then the hands. His hands were wrong. Too tight. The left one was holding his phone with a grip that had gone white at the knuckle. His eyes found Amara across the room. And in them, she saw something she had not expected from a man of his particular construction. Fear. Real fear. The kind that lives below performance and strategy and money and power, and all the armor that men like him spent their lives assembling. The animal, unmanaged fear of someone who has just understood that they are not the most dangerous thing in the room. He looked at her and he looked past her, and he found what he was looking for, and his face did something complicated and final. Amara turned to follow his sightline. Yiwon was standing 12 feet away. He had his phone to his ear. He was listening to whoever was speaking with the patient, complete attention of a man receiving a confirmation. Then he lowered the phone. He looked at Preston Hale across the width of the room with the same dispassionate, unhurried focus he'd turned on him earlier. He said nothing. He didn't need to. Because behind Preston Hale, emerging from the service corridor with the quiet efficiency of people who had been waiting for exactly this moment, were 4 people in dark clothing who moved with a purposefulness that was not the purposefulness of event security. And behind them, in the corridor's threshold, Amara could see, even from this distance, even in the dim light, 2 uniformed figures. Police. Not Yuan's people. Actual law enforcement. The kind with badges and jurisdiction, and 11 months of someone else's careful, documented, legally admissible preparation, handed to them at precisely the right moment. Amara understood then, fully, completely, what I came to do had meant. Not retribution. Not the quiet, untraceable consequences she'd seen Yiwon arrange before, the kind that happened to people and couldn't be traced back to anything with a name or a face. He had built a case. 11 months of tracking, documenting, evidencing, and then he had handed it to people whose job it was to use it in the way that would stick. Permanently. Publicly. The kind of ending that couldn't be paid away or quietly dissolved because it existed in official records and would be followed by a trial and the word, guilty, spoken in a room where it meant something lasting. Preston Hale took 1 step backward. One of the dark-clothed figures said something to him in a tone that carried clearly across the now-silent room. He stopped. Diane's hand found Amara's shoulder from behind. Warm. Steady. Her best friend who didn't know everything and knew enough and was standing close anyway. Amara watched Preston Hale's face complete its final transformation, from fear into the gray, collapsing blankness of a man understanding that tonight was the last night of one version of his life. She felt nothing like satisfaction. She felt something quieter and more durable than satisfaction. She felt the specific, bone-deep relief of a woman who had moved her friend 6 feet from a cliff's edge and watched the cliff crumble from a safe distance. Across the room, Yiwon's eyes found hers. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. They didn't speak until the room had emptied. It took 40 minutes. The police were efficient and discreet in the way of people who had been briefed thoroughly and had no interest in spectacle. Preston Hale was removed through the service corridor rather than the main entrance, which meant most of the gala's guests understood something had happened without understanding exactly what, and the uncertainty produced a rapid, collective decision to leave. The string quartet packed their instruments. The catering staff moved through the thinning crowd collecting glasses, with the practiced neutrality of people paid not to have opinions about the evenings they witnessed. Diane had stayed close to Amara through all of it. She hadn't asked questions. She had simply occupied the space beside her with the solid, uncomplicated presence of a woman who understood that some explanations required stillness before they required words. When the last of the police finished their sweep of the 39th floor, and the gala coordinator began dimming the overhead lights in the universal signal that an evening was concluded, Diane had squeezed Amara's shoulder and said quietly, "Call me tomorrow," and Amara had said asterisk first thing. And they had held each other's eyes for a moment with the full weight of what tonight had almost been, and what it hadn't been because of a phone call and a red dress, and the specific gravity of a man Amara had spent 14 months trying to escape. Then Diane left, and the penthouse went quiet. Yiwon was at the window. He stood with his hands in his pockets and his back partially to the room, looking at the city the way he looked at most things, with the contained, patient attention of someone who understood that the world revealed more when you weren't demanding it perform for you. The overhead lights had dimmed to a low, ambient glow. The glass walls held the city's light like water holds color, diffuse, everywhere, sourceless. Amara moved toward him. She stopped 6 feet away. She didn't close the remaining distance, and he didn't turn to eliminate it, and they existed for a moment in the careful geometry of two people who had once known each other completely, and were now navigating the altered topography of what came after. 11 months, she said. Yes. You built the entire case from Seoul. And London, and twice from Los Angeles. He paused. There was a week in Lagos. She absorbed this. You could have handed it off, given what you had to someone else to finish. Yes. Why didn't you? He was quiet for long enough that she knew he was choosing his words with the particular care he reserved for things that mattered. The things he didn't want to get wrong, because getting them wrong would mean they couldn't be unsaid. Because the network had a Los Angeles node, he said finally, and you are in Los Angeles. He turned from the window then and looked at her directly. And because I needed to know it was finished, completely, he stopped. Before you what? She said. The city burned behind him in 10,000 points of light. Before I came to you, he said, with nothing unfinished behind me. The honesty of that moved through her slowly, not like a wave, not with the dramatic force of something she could brace against, but the way water moves through stone, finding the smallest channels and widening them gradually from the inside. She had known Yiwon to be many things: controlled, precise, formidable in ways that most people spent their lives never encountering firsthand. She had not always known him to be this kind of brave. The kind that didn't look like bravery from the outside, because it was quiet and came without armor. The divorce was real, she said, not as an accusation, as a fact that needed to exist in the air between them before anything else could. Yes, he said. I signed those papers because I needed to. Because staying meant disappearing into something I couldn't. I needed to know I existed outside of it, outside of you. I know, he said. You didn't fight it. No. Why? He looked at her steadily. Because you needed me not to. A pause. And because what you needed mattered more than what I wanted. The simplicity of that, the absolute, undecorated truth of it, was more than most men could have produced, and more than most men would have offered, and she felt it settle into the place inside her that had been quietly aching for 14 months without her full permission. She looked at her hands on the armrests of her chair. The hands that had relearned everything: how to grip, how to transfer, how to work clay and metal and wire from a different position, how to rebuild a life and a business and an identity from a foundation that had shifted permanently beneath her. Strong hands, her hands. "I don't need saving," she said. "I know that." "Tonight wasn't. Tonight was not about saving you," he said. "Tonight was about 11 months of work arriving at its conclusion in a room where you happened to be." He paused. "And about a man who said something to you that he shouldn't have. Both of those things are true, and neither of them is about your capacity to exist without me." She looked up at him. "Then what is it about?" she said quietly. He crossed the 6 feet between them then, not quickly, not with the urgency of someone afraid the moment would close before he reached it, but with the same deliberate, unhurried certainty with which he did everything. He crouched beside her chair the way he had earlier in the evening, bringing himself level, and she did not look away. "It's about the fact," he said, "that I have been in 12 cities in 11 months, and I have not been in a single one of them without thinking about you, specifically, clearly, without confusion about whether that would change." She said nothing. "It's about the fact that I had your number unblocked on my phone for 14 months, and I called it 0 times because you needed the distance, and I was willing to give it to you for as long as you needed it." His voice remained even, quiet, each word placed with precision. "But I am not willing to give it to you indefinitely, because indefinitely is not distance. Indefinitely is surrender, and I don't surrender things that matter to me." "I might need more time," she said. "I know. I might decide. I know that too." "You're very calm about uncertainty," she said. Something moved across his face. The thing she'd seen earlier, that careful, controlled beginning of something he was allowing himself to feel in front of her. "I'm not calm about it," he said. "I'm disciplined about it. Those are different things." She looked at him. This man who had walked into a room full of danger and handled it with the quiet efficiency of someone who had been handling dangerous rooms his entire life, who had built 11 months of careful, legal, permanent work around protecting a city he knew she lived in, who was crouching beside her chair in an empty penthouse at 11:43 at night, and telling her the truth about himself with his hands loose at his sides and his eyes completely open. She reached out. She put her hand against the side of his face, her palm against his jaw, her thumb near the corner of his mouth, the way she had 1,000 times in a life that felt both very close and very far from this moment. He went absolutely still. Not the stillness of a man suppressing reaction, the stillness of a man receiving something he had not allowed himself to expect. "Coffee," she said. "Tomorrow morning, somewhere public, somewhere ordinary, we talk." She held his gaze. "That's all I'm offering right now, we talk." He turned his face slightly, not enough to dislodge her hand, just enough to feel the full weight of the contact. His eyes closed for one brief moment. When they opened, the careful hope she'd seen earlier had become something more resolved. Not relief, exactly. Certainty. The particular certainty of a man who had been patient for a very long time and had just been given one reason to continue being patient rather than no reasons at all. "Coffee," he said. "Tomorrow." She lowered her hand. Outside the glass walls, Lowe's Angels continued its indifferent, blazing existence. 10 million lives in motion. None of them aware that in a dimmed penthouse 42 floors above their streets, two people who had once been everything to each other were sitting in the careful, fragile, necessary space between an ending and whatever came next. It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't a beginning. It was two people deciding, quietly and without ceremony, that the distance between them deserved to be examined rather than simply maintained. And sometimes that was everything. Amara Cole had walked into this room tonight in a red dress, measuring exits. She left it thinking about doors she might, eventually, choose to open. Behind her, Kim Yi-won followed at a distance that was respectful and present, and said everything about a man who had learned, the hard way, over 14 months of saying nothing, that some things were worth waiting for. The elevator doors closed. The city held them both. and somewhere on the 39th floor of the Harrington Tower, in a suite that would be unsealed by morning and examined by people with badges and jurisdiction, and the full weight of the law behind them, the evidence of 11 months of careful, patient, permanent work sat waiting to be read. The most dangerous man in the room had not thrown a single punch tonight. He hadn't needed to. He had simply made sure that when the night ended, the right people went home,